Good evening. I'm John Stride, President of City Club. We're excited to welcome you to our preview of Oregon's short legislative session. Please take a moment and silence your cell phones. Thank you. We're delighted to be joined this evening by a panel of experienced political reporters. Carlos Fuentes with the Oregonian, Dirk VanderHart with OPB, and Dick Hughes, recently retired from the Oregon Capitol Insider. The conversation will be moderated by former House Majority Leader Jennifer Williamson. They will unpack the important policy and budget issues that the short session legislature will tackle starting a week from today. We'd also like to welcome several legislators and elected officials who are joining us this evening, along with any legislative staffers who we all know are the backbone of assisting behind the scenes. Before we begin, a word about City Club. Our mission is to educate and inform our members and the community about matters of public interest and to provide space for civic dialogue that encourages respectful discussion and positive change. We encourage this by producing nonpartisan public forums and debates and conducting policy research that results in a written report with recommendations to policymakers. City Club members provide the ideas, lead the conversations, conduct the research, and plan the programs like this one that address important issues to our community. It's member dues and donations that make it possible for City Club to offer programs like this free to the public. Everyone is welcome at City Club. You can learn more about events and membership and research at our website, pdxcityclub.org. You can also use the QR code at the registration desk to join or contribute. If you join today, you can take $40 off your annual membership dues by using the discount code NEW40. That's capital N, capital E, capital W, 40. Also, we have a dues assistance program. So if you or someone you know could benefit from that or might be interested, please pass that along. Well, we have a wonderful and lively lineup of programs scheduled in the next few months I'd like to tell you about quickly. Through February and March, we will host all 12 Portland City Councilors at venues in their districts. With one full year of experience in these roles under Portland's new form of government, you will hear councilors reflect on the challenges, they've had those, and achievements of the past year, and the opportunities they see going forward. This City Council series will be moderated by Willamette Week's Sophie Peel. The first program is on Wednesday, February 4th from 6 to 7:30, featuring Portland City Councilors for District 3, which is primarily Southeast Portland, Tiffany Koyama Lane, Angelita Murillo, and Steve Nobick will be there. It will be at St. Philip Neri Church on Southeast 16th. On Friday, February 6th at noon, we're excited to host former Governor John Kitzhaber and the former Director of the Oregon Health Authority, Bruce Goldberg, to discuss Oregon's healthcare crisis. A second healthcare program on March 6th will focus on putting policies into practice. Both of these programs will take place at the University Place Hotel near PSU in Portland. Now a special thanks to Robin Denberg, Tom Karwacki, and Bobby Reagan, City Club Program Committee members, and the producers of this program tonight. And a thanks to Kayla Kennedy, City Club Communications Director. We also thank Alberta Rose for hosting this event. Finally, take a moment to thank our season sponsors who allow us to present programs such as this one, AARP Oregon and the Don Sterling Fund of the Oregon Community Foundation. Please join me in showing our appreciation of those sponsors. Thank you. And now to tonight's program. We are pleased to be joined by Jennifer Williamson and three distinguished journalists for tonight's conversation. Afterwards, several legislators or staff may have questions for the panel, and then you, our audience, will have an opportunity to ask questions. Now, about the moderator and panelists. After working for Senator Hatfield and Oregon Superintendent for Public Instruction, Jennifer Williamson was elected to the Oregon House of Representatives, and 3 years later, her colleagues elected her House Majority Leader. She championed criminal justice reform, women's health care, and policies to support working Oregonians. Currently, she is a partner and co-founder of Swift Public Affairs. Carlos Fuentes is the state politics and government reporter for the Oregonian, Oregon Live. He covers the Oregon governor, lawmakers, state agencies, elections, examining how policy decisions are made in Salem that affect Oregonians throughout the state. Dick Hughes is the former state politics and government reporter for Capital Insider. Dick has been covering Oregon politics since 1976, and until a few years ago also maintained the useful Capital Chatter and Who's Who in and around the state government columns. Dirk VanderHart is the politics and government reporter for Oregon Public Broadcasting. A longtime reporter at OPB, Dirk is well-versed in all that happens in Salem. Before moving to radio in 2018, he spent more than a decade as a reporter for the Portland Mercury, reporting on city government. And now, Jennifer, the floor is yours.
Thank you, John. Can you all hear me? It's good to be here tonight. Thank you for the introductions. Thank you, panelists, for being here, and for our audience. For those of you who don't live and breathe the Oregon Legislature, although many of you do, because I recognize you out in the audience, we're about to start a short session. So unlike the odd year sessions that are 160 days, the one starting next week is only 35, for better or worse. What's interesting about the short session is the bill, there's lots of things that are interesting about the short session, but bill limits. So each member can only introduce 2 bills, and each committee only gets 3 bills. So it makes the universe of things that the legislature will deal with a little smaller than in longer sessions as well. So tonight we want to focus on what we think is coming in the next 35 days and what the hot topics are that we think will be moving through between now and the first week of December in Salem, or I'm sorry, in March in Salem. So, but my first question is not about hot topics. It's about process, my favorite thing. So I left the legislature right before COVID and right before the building went into 5 years of construction. So I know how you guys used to work before, in the before times. I would find you in the hallways wandering around, or you'd be sitting on the side of the house and I would think I had a really good idea for you, and I'd walk over and say, hey, let's chat. There were no virtual hearings. There were no virtual votes. You had to be in person to do anything in the legislature. So what's changed since I left? What changed with COVID? What changed with things being virtual in the legislature, and with the building literally being closed for 5 years so that people couldn't be together? Have things changed? Are things really the same now that the building is reopened? If you haven't seen it, go see it. It's beautiful. But what's different?
Yeah, I mean, first and most immediately, I think like none of us had offices anymore in the Capitol. We, in the press, have always been in the basement. It's was a very grungy place, very unsafe feeling place, because you'd often start to think about, if there's an earthquake, we are the first ones that are getting pancaked, and you would start to sort of plan out your exit route over the course of the day. But for the last 5 years or so, OPB, the Oregonian, none of us had offices. So we were camped across the street at Willamette University. That makes things really tough, because I think the best thing you can do when you're covering the legislature is to be in the building. It's those interactions you have with people in the hallways. If she's trying to buttonhole me about some idea or whatever, I'm not going to get that if I'm watching on Zoom. So that changed. But I think all of us stayed in the building. You know, we were in the building, just not in offices. And to your point about the building being more open, actually it really simplified coverage a lot for me when there was just, so for anyone who doesn't know, when the building was under renovation, there was one long hallway near the hearing rooms, and that is the only way that senators could walk to the House side or representatives could walk to the Senate side. It really, really simplified finding people, because all you do is sit there all day, and pretty soon someone you want to talk to is coming across your path. Now there are all these little rat paths all through the building people can take to try to dodge us. I think that's going to be a little bit tricky, but it is nice to have the building back. Sorry for rambling.
I'll just say, as someone who has only been in this job for a little over 2 years and only knew like the smaller, closed-down version of the Capitol, coming back just in the last couple of months and seeing the building more open now has been pretty astounding. It feels a lot more lively, a lot more energetic, and like Dirk said, it feels like it'll be easier for people to kind of evade us in the hallways, but I think we'll make it work.
Well, when I was your age, and the dinosaurs parked, no. We shouldn't underestimate the devastation to the political process by the closure of the building, both for COVID and for the construction. And not that anybody's to blame, but what happened was you didn't have the chance encounters of running into other elected officials. For example, the governor, Governor Brown and Governor Kotek no longer were in the Capitol, neither were the Secretary of State or the State Treasurer. So, and there are a lot of those interactions that happen because you run into somebody in a hallway and you get to know them. Now, one of the great things about the building is those state officials are back in the offices, and there's now a joint lounge, the Peter Courtney Memorial Lounge, something he'd always pushed for, where senators and representatives, regardless of party, can gather. Before there were separate lounges. And the hope is that that will breed some more collaboration or at least understanding of one another.
Great, thank you. And that's my hope too, being back in the building together, that people will work well together. So let's talk about the budget, because of course we're going to start with the budget. The economic forecast in Oregon has been a real roller coaster for at least the last 6 months. In November, it was reported that the anticipated shortfall for the state's budget would be in the neighborhood of $915 million, which took into account a pretty mild wildfire season, the increase in costs for food assistance that the state administered, and a savings goal for the state legislature of $350 million to set aside for contingency. As we know, the legislature passes their budget every 2 years in the long session, and it goes into effect July 1 of that odd year. So this year, H.R. 1 was passed just a few days after Oregon finalized its budget for the next 2 years. And that federal tax cut and spending package will have long-term impacts, significant impacts on Oregon's spending, not only this biennium, but in the future. With all of that being said, the state is facing about a $600 million shortfall for the budget that we're currently in. How do you think this is going to play out in the next 6 weeks?
Well, I know Carlos and Dirk have all the answers. So before I hand it over to them, the other factor is most legislators have never had to deal with cutting budgets, just because of the times from when they came to the Capitol. And they're not used to the whole Capitol setting because it's been under construction, at least half of the legislators. So those are the dynamics that are going to be affecting those discussions.
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, that's the point I was going to make, because I'm already talking to lawmakers who are part of these budget subcommittees. They are just really not relishing their jobs right now. In the past decade, I mean, I've covered the Capitol for 8 years now, and throughout those times, we've had relatively sunny budget projections. Money has come in more. I mean, they've had money to spend, programs to fund, all these fun things that lawmakers like to do. Now they are going to be making cuts, and maybe really precipitous cuts, if not in the next 6 weeks, next year certainly. And that is not very fun for people. Some of the lawmakers in the audience can maybe speak to that. But so I think they are going to have a very hard time. The most important meeting probably in this short session is going to be on February 4th, when the revenue committees hear the new revenue forecast. That is going to dictate what our budget hole is. The number I heard actually the other day was like 750 million is the operating hole that they think they have, but no one really knows. And we're going to get a lot more certainty on the 4th, and that is going to dictate, you know, whose bills have no chance, how much money there is to spend on maybe some new stuff, and what the scope of possible cuts are going to have to be. So I can't predict it, and I don't think anyone really knows at this point, and everyone's kind of pinning their hopes or pinning their whatevers to the 4th.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Dirk just said. I'll say, yeah, there was such a fluctuation between the, was it the November forecast and the most recent one? Or the August forecast and the November forecast. What was that difference? It was like 400-something million down to 63 million, the deficit was, and it seems that, you know, no one has any idea what this one is really going to look like. And yeah, your guess is as good as mine.
So when you think about the Oregon budget, the big buckets are healthcare, education, and corrections. Right. So what are you hearing, if anything, legislators are talking about in each of those kind of big buckets? Are you having conversations with individual legislators about how they're thinking about it, what they'd like to see, the process they'd like to see with budget cuts? I mean, what are they talking about individually in this process? Because you're right, Dick, it is a huge difference from the recession after 2008. That was really the last time that we had, it wasn't to this extent, we think, but there were significant budget cuts. And since then, it has only been growth. So what are you hearing from folks about at least the way they're thinking about the process?
Yeah, I will be honest, I have not heard, I mean, I'm not getting a lot of specifics from people, and I haven't called every budget subcommittee chair about exactly what they want to do, but people really are kind of they seem to be putting this off until they know actual numbers, and that's maybe when they're going to show their hand. We know that, you know, all the agencies, I believe, had to put a 2.5% and 5% cuts budget together just to show lawmakers what it would look like. As best we know, the top budget writers have started prioritizing what those cuts might look like. And when we hear what the revenue forecast looks like on the 4th, they are going to essentially draw a line that shows what might be funded and what might have to go away. But I wish I had better information for these folks about, you know, these many schools are going to see this much cut. We don't have that at this point. I think there is a real desire to shore up healthcare and schools specifically. I have not heard as much about corrections and what that might look like.
Yeah, no, I have the same exact information that Dirk does, it sounds like. I mean, are you surprised that we haven't seen any kind of plan? Can I, as someone who was in the building previously?
How do I want to talk about this? I think, if I remember correctly, coming out of the 2008 recession, I really felt like there was an organizing theory in the way that folks were thinking about the budget. And it was that kids come first. I remember Kulangowski saying that kids come first. Whenever we're talking about the budget, the question was, if we make this, are we putting the kids first? And I haven't heard that sort of thinking about the budget, and that's, I guess, what I'm wondering is if you're hearing any of that sort of way to, as opposed to the agencies gave their suggested cuts, and it's just going to go on a list, and that's the way in which the cuts are being generated. And I don't know if you're hearing anything else.
No, I just don't think the messaging has been really, like, it sounds like the messaging was very clear in that, I mean, people really thought through what we want to communicate to the public. Typically, the way things have worked in the building recently is the budget co-chairs, you know, they come up with a framework, they kind of walk reporters through it, they say, here's what we're thinking. We just have none of that. They've done a little bit, I mean, they had an editorial, I think Kate Lieber, one of the chairs, has been chatting with folks, but there hasn't been this grand unifying theory about here's why we want to do things. It would be very helpful, and I hope that they do that in relatively short order when the session starts so people get a sense of where they're going. But there just hasn't been, here is where we want to take the state given these circumstances.
I fear it will be a bloodbath. And
Tell us why, Dick.
well, you've got two members of the legislature, at least two running for governor, pushing their ideas. You've got a governor running for governor, and you've got all these competing interests. And the filing deadline to run for office in this year's election is right after the legislature adjourns. And so the short session always have had that problem that they're a precursor to the elections. So this is going to be campaign season. You don't have a lot of money. People who are relatively new to the legislature, and for those who've never been in a short session, it moves faster than the speed of light. You introduce your idea, and the next week it's either going to survive or it's dead. And if you haven't done your homework, it's dead. And as Dirk said, we haven't heard a lot about this is what the plan is. The governor has been very clear on her priorities. She's stuck to them throughout her term so far, and I give her credit for that. Other people have their priorities, but we don't even have a framework for dealing with transportation that I'm aware of.
Yeah, and kind of to this whole point of not having the messaging from leadership, that applies to every strategy that they could use. You know, they could potentially tap reserve funds, but they haven't said whether or not they're actually going to be able to, or to what extent they would. Same thing goes with tax disconnecting from the federal code. There's been no plan made public for that, so it's really unclear what they're actually willing to do.
Carlos, do you want to just explain the tax disconnect? I want to make sure we're not
Yeah. Dirk might do a better job.
Insider baseballing up here.
I can take a stab.
Take a stab at it.
Oregon's tax system generally automatically connects to the federal system, meaning that any tax cuts that are implemented at the federal level also affect an Oregonian's adjusted gross income for their state taxes. So so from some of these tax breaks in Trump's bill from last year, such as no taxes on overtime, Oregon is one of the states that would automatically adopt that for the people's state taxes as well.
Well, and the problem with that is for our budget situation is that just means we are going to lose, according to the analysts, around $890 million in the current budget that would have come into the state's general fund absent H.R. 1 and the tax cuts there. So it is a very, very tricky, and maybe we can get more into this, but very tricky vote that lawmakers are going to have in front of them, because some of them will make the argument that they are not raising taxes. This is just the status quo. The fact of the matter is, functionally, though, if they don't do anything, the people's taxes would be lower, and it will be a very easy rhetorical move for Republicans and other opponents to make to say it's a tax vote. It'll be a very sticky conversation, I expect.
Well, and the budget that we're currently living under had all of that assumption built into it. So they built a budget for these 2 years connected to a different tax code at the federal level. So they assumed that money was in the bank when they were busy putting together their spending plans.
Carlos, you reminded me, though, on the reserve funds. One thing I have heard, there does seem to be growing movement among at least some Democrats I've talked to tap the state's Education Stability Fund to minimize or eliminate any cuts to schools. What that means for the other spending priorities in the state, I don't know, but it feels like that there seems to be some momentum there.
Transportation. Go.
It is hard to imagine anything that has been bungled worse, other than maybe cover Oregon, which is very different. All sorts of things could have been done. There's fighting over when it will, first, would it be on the ballot, or when it will be on the ballot. And any sane person would have known that it would be referred to the ballot. Okay. The legislators could have included a provision in the bill to put it at a special election or in the May election. But something needs to be done in transportation, but it's a good lesson in don't overshoot, because that's what happened to begin with, and they thought, the Democrats and the supermajority, I think, thought they had the votes to do what they wanted. as opposed to the last transportation bill that was worked out, major project bill that was worked out in the basement of the Capitol with 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats working throughout the session on a bill that they all could agree with, and it had wide bipartisan support.
Do you have a question, or you just want to say?
Well, I mean, it's a sub-question of the budget, right? It's one of the things that is lingering out there. And so my question is, what are you hearing? What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I don't want to assume that everyone knows the soap opera that has existed here.
Give us the soap
right?
opera,
like, does
Dirk.
People know the soap. So, the legislature came into session last year. The biggest thing on the list was a new transportation funding package. Let's find billions of dollars for things. And most importantly, let's keep this ethos about it where in packages past, we've put all this pork out, right? We bought lawmakers' votes with all these big, shiny projects, and that kind of came back to bite us because it wound up we weren't spending a lot on maintenance and some of the things that really need to be spent on. So they come in with this high-minded idea last year. We're going to find all this new money. We're not promising anybody anything for new packages, and we're just going to pass it, and we're going to rescue our transportation system, which for all the bungling, like I think that initial even position was probably their fatal flaw, because it turns out it is very, very hard to pass a new tax, let alone billions of dollars in new taxes, without giving lawmakers the things they need to say yes. And Democrats really screwed it up. Apologies to the legislative Democrats who might be in the room. There was not messaging. They rolled out the bill 3 weeks with 3 weeks left of session. They didn't have their votes lined up. They had to come into a special session to pass something that was a half measure. That got referred to the ballot. Those gas taxes and registration fee hikes have been now been blocked. So we have a $242 million hole for ODOT that if it doesn't get filled, there will be some bloodletting. We're not going to see some of the street maintenance people want, and there is just a big funding question alongside all the other ones for how we're going to do this. And I could keep going, but I feel like I'm speaking too much.
What I think is interesting is that I feel like you haven't seen any of the legislative leaders, at least on the Democratic side, take responsibility for all of the mistakes that have happened. At the end of last year's session, a bunch of reporters were there in the Capitol talking to the Senate President and the House Speaker, and we asked, how much of this is your fault? Where did things go wrong? Just really pressing on them. And kind of the biggest takeaway they gave us that they got was, it's hard to do big things. But, here we are months and months later. There's been a lot more mistakes. And it's really clear how they're going to change their approach in any way.
Yeah, and the other thing they said, though, was we tried this. As I said, they wanted to do this without pork and buying people off with projects. We tried this. We thought it was going to be this great thing. I just don't think that was politically viable. And I think they are right there, and I also think they mismanaged a lot of things along the way.
Yes.
But the budget question is really fascinating, too, because what we have heard they want to do now is they can't raise taxes. There's this hole, so they are going to move money around our transportation budget to figure out how to not have layoffs, how to fund some of the basic maintenance services. Where do they pull from, right? We have these super projects, I-5 Rose Quarter, Columbia River Crossing, or Interstate Bridge Replacement, some other stuff, too, that has a lot of money sitting waiting for it. They don't look super viable right now. Do we pull money from that to sort of stanch the bleeding in ODOT? And if we do, what does that mean for the future of those projects? We know any project money we pull and put toward other things, you're then delaying projects. That makes them far more expensive going forward because of the inflation on these things. I mean, there's just no easy answers to it, and it's going to be fascinating to figure out or see what they arrive at. The governor has said transit is off limits, which is Republicans' big answer to this, but we don't know where she gets the money.
Yeah, there's been so many proposals thrown out there, a lot of them not viable in any way, like the transit tax. For example, there was a Democrat just a couple of weeks ago who said, let's redirect all the state funding that goes to cities and counties for transportation and just help fund ODOT. That's not going anywhere. Yes, that was Representative Paul Evans. And yeah, if not mega projects, are we talking about taking money from pedestrian safety projects, which is something that a lot of Portlanders really love, or just wildlife crossings? There's so many different things that ODOT pays for, but all of them are things that different advocacy groups really, really care about. So yeah, it's kind of an impossible situation they're in.
One of the problems is we Oregonians don't understand each other. There's a lot of discussion about how much money ODOT is spending on curb cuts and supposedly out in the middle of nowhere. Well, if you're someone who uses a stroller because you happen to have kids or a wheelchair, or you're hauling something, maybe you don't have money, and so you're hauling stuff in a hand-hauled wagon. These curb cuts matter, and maybe there are some places they should not be built, but what we tend to do is attack what is being done instead of understanding why it's being done.
Do you think that's gotten worse?
Oh yeah, that's gotten worse. You know, how many legislators have been to Jordan Valley? How many Eastern Oregon legislators have spent a month living in Portland? I mean, one of the things I give Dennis Richardson credit for when he was running for governor is he moved to Portland for a while. Republican from, Southern Oregon. But until you walk in someone else's shoes, I mean, this is basic folk wisdom, but we don't follow it. I would, start an exchange program for legislators, and a lot of them have been doing short exchanges, going to Eastern Oregon or coming to Portland or whatever. But if you had to spend 2 months of the year in someone else's district, it would be fascinating what resulted.
So, besides the budget, there will be lots of policy bills introduced. Not as many as in a long session, but still a few. What are you hearing about policy bills, and what do you think, if you had to bet right now on the policy bills that would take up the most time and energy, what would they be?
I mean, what Democrats are saying is very much that federal immigration enforcement is like right at the top of their agenda up there with the budget stuff. And they've unveiled kind of an array of bills that they say are a response to what they see as aggressive federal immigration enforcement tactics and just a broad range of other federal policies. I will say a lot of those don't have a lot of concrete details behind them. They're kind of vague ideas. For example, one that would require federal agents to not wear masks, or unless they, were in some kind of operation where they had to, and display the name of the agency that they work for. That one's kind of been floating around for a while. But there's other ones that are maybe a little more legally questionable. For example, one that would allow citizens to sue federal agents if they believe their constitutional rights have been violated. And I don't know, there's a wide array of them, but I think Democrats are really saying that this is top of mind for them.
Yeah, there's one that would stop the state from doing business with businesses that might be helping in immigration raids. I think there's one to force schools to have plans for what happens if ICE shows up. That feels like it will be a very big emphasis, at least initially, with them. But I agree with you. It is not clear. I mean, there's no silver bullet, and we've done a lot. When you were House leader, during Trump, you all did a lot to try to shore up the state against what you felt was federal overreach. And so there's just not that much still out there. And I am sort of reserving judgment on whether, I haven't looked at all the bills, but whether or not some of them might just be window dressing, not really workable. It's just not clear to me.
Each side also will be doing their basic policy bills that please their main supporters. The one advantage is, as Jennifer said, individual legislators are limited to 2 bills. The last year's long session would have gone so much smoother if there had been limits on bills. And part of the problem is people talked about how they couldn't get revenue estimates for the transportation package until too late in the session. Well, that's because there were so many revenue bills introduced that the Office of the Legislative Revenue Office needed to analyze. And the more that we control the number of bills, the better the outcome. It's the whole thing, if you have 10 priorities, you don't have any priorities. I'm working on a biography of the late Senate President Peter Courtney, and he was one of the originators of the annual session movement. And he came and he supported 35-day short sessions, but he came to believe that the short session should be longer, probably at least 40 days, because there's so many things to deal with. A lot of it's routine fixes because, no bill is perfect. You find things that didn't go the way you expected. Rob Nose has an omnibus health bill that I think he said it's going to be 130 pages. Not controversial, but all these little technical fixes that need to be made.
Yeah, I mean, do you just want us to tee off on things we think might be coming? I mean,
what's coming? What are you hearing about?
Well, I just think I'm thinking in buckets, right? And I think economic development feels like it's really having a moment right now in Salem. Republicans have been saying for years, you Dems are driving us into the ditch. You're souring the business environment. We really think this is bad. And suddenly there is a little more traction. It feels like the governor has this prosperity council. She's asking for recommendations. She's going to have her own bill that does some things. I think the aim is to slash red tape so big projects can move forward more smoothly, but she is not the only one. I've probably talked to 4 or 5 lawmakers that have economic development bills. So things like, bringing all this land in Hillsborough into the urban growth boundary that has been targeted for a long time for some sort of tech development, or changing the enterprise zone laws. I mean, these economic development tools get very wonky very quick, but there seems to be a moment, and it's like, the question feels like, is this a sort of gambit by folks because affordability is all the rage and we have to be shown as doing something? Is this a really sincere recognition that the state has some real problems and we want to take the time to fix them? That is a big question. I mean, one of the most interesting things that happened in my radar in recent weeks was the governor hiring former Senate Minority Leader Tim Knopp in her office as her prosperity czar. He's the guy that's going to be driving the economic development truck in the governor's office, and it shocked pretty much everyone I talked to. It probably shocked you.
It did shock me.
Because it's just not, I mean, there's a lot that's not clear about that, but just to say, I will be really looking at what the proposals are, what has traction, what does this mean for the conversations we're going to have going forward about how we make the state's economy look better, because right now there are a lot of indicators that are not very positive.
Yeah, I agree with you that a lot of lawmakers from both parties are saying that the economy and helping state businesses is a top priority, but kind of the same thing as transportation and revenue stuff. We haven't seen any specific plan from the leadership, at least. We've seen bills here and there, kind of like Dirk mentioned, this one in Hillsborough example, but is that something that's going to help most Oregonians? I think a lot of people would say no. Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, what you hear from businesses is they are really reserving judgment about Kotek's effort here. They don't know whether it's sincere or it's just an election year and she needs to be shown to be doing the right things. I don't know either. I think it's certainly partly sincere. I don't know. I couldn't tell you. I haven't spoken with her about it. But there is a lot of show us what you're going to do before we actually decide that this is real.
Is anyone talking about education? Is anyone, usually, in my experience, when there is a majority of Democrats, education is almost always at the top of the list. And I have been fascinated by what feels like silence, with all due respect to the education chair who's sitting right over there. Comparatively, it's been incredibly quiet around education. And I'm wondering if that's just me, or if you guys are hearing the same sort of chatter pre-session around education.
So I will be honest, I don't, education is, look, we have schools reporters that cover that a little more closely. I have not heard about it. Remember, we did a pretty big education reform bill last session where, school districts that are performing poorly are now going to be tied to some more stringent requirements from the state, at least moving forward. I have not heard, and in fact, I know you work in the education space now, and probably the fact that you're not hearing anything speaks to me that these things aren't happening. So
There are some proposals out there that are being greeted with, these are much too complicated to deal with in a short session. And this also is, a budget cutting session, cutting, what organizations are going to receive and programs are going to receive. So a lot of it is protecting what people have, what programs that are out there. And if any ever, this is the time for bipartisan urban-rural collaboration on these are the things we need to improve in education or whatever it may be by passing this, thing or removing this requirement too.
What are you hearing about healthcare? Anything? I'm just thinking again about if it's a budget year,
Yeah.
the big buckets of what we spend our money on as Oregon taxpayers and what the legislature spends their money on. Transportation is obviously a big piece of this conversation, but what about healthcare, education, corrections?
Dick mentioned there's a kind of very technical bill coming. That might be the biggest thing we see. It really does feel like the budget is the main thing, right? There is all this money we need to pay in caseloads that are coming in far more expensive than we thought. Because of H.R. 1, we are now checking people, or will be checking people for eligibility for Medicaid far more often. That is going to require the state to hire far more people to sort of do those checks, and we are being told that is going to be very, very expensive. And so, it is very much a question of how we fund all these things that we need to fund when we're looking at a $750 million hole. And that is essentially all that.
In terms of behavioral health, I know that one of the governor's top priorities is going to be pushing some of the recommendations that her behavioral health workforce council that is chaired by her wife came up with, and just recently rolled out some of the recommendations. I'll be totally honest, I don't know what those recommendations are, but I know that it is one of her top priorities. So I guess we'll see what effect, if any, those have.
Well, there are some things that are on the margin, like Senator Patterson wants the state to have increased regulation of hospices, which have largely become a private endeavor, apparently. So there's some things like that going on. There's some work on with EMTs and other things. And a lot of this stuff is bills that fell by the wayside in the last session, because it often takes 3 sessions for a bill to marinate long enough that it has sufficient support.
Yeah, there was a labor bill last time about home health care workers that was very controversial and didn't cross the finish line, and I think that's coming back. I don't fully understand that bill, so I can't tell you about it.
I don't either, but I know that business lobbyists are planning to fight it as much as they can. So it should be an interesting one.
It's coming. Dick, what are the big changes now that you're retired? And you can speak more freely. What are the things you wish legislators knew? You talked about the urban-rural divide. What do you think they should be telling their constituents and their communities to help make legislators' jobs not easier, but more effective?
Well, tonight I am happy to announce that I'm running for it. No. First of all, we've talked a lot about what legislators should do and shouldn't have done. But for the most part, they're really good people. They're really bright people. They're really hard-working people, and they get along much better than the headlines may say. And that holds true for much of the staff, too. And the Capitol runs on the staff, the quality of the staff. The thing that strikes me starts with the chief executive, the governor. she does not seem introspective, recognizing her missteps, and taking responsibility for them. And I'm not a politician. I'm a journalist. I make a ton of mistakes. And we used to run corrections every day in the newspaper, you know, because we make mistakes. We try to be perfectly accurate, but none of us is. And one of the things I appreciated about Courtney was he was willing to lose an election. He wouldn't go negative against an opponent. Now, some of his supporters would. And what I wish for is people really could understand where the other people were coming from instead of playing to their own ideological, often the extreme. Most Oregonians, I think, are more in the center. And if we could get people to work more on start with where they agree instead of where they disagree. And some legislators do that really well. And there have been great accomplishments. But any great accomplishment comes from that working on what we have on common. And I think former Governor John Kitzhaber has said it well repeatedly that we have lost a common vision of the state of Oregon. And the first thing we need to do is re-agree on what that vision is and where we're going with it.
I will agree with you, Dick, that in my experience, I would often say that everyone I worked with in the legislature was there for the right reason. We may disagree on, to make Oregon a better place. We may disagree on how we get there, but we were all there for the same reason. So I agree with you on that.
Well, I'm not going to speak to what Dick just spoke to because that was very eloquent. I would say, though, what we haven't talked about is questions about what the dynamics will look like in the building, given what you just said, right? So we have all the Democratic leadership coming back from last year. We have two brand new Republican leaders, I think. And there always is a question in the short session about how the majority party is going to be able to handle the clock, right? There's only 35 days to do this. When you get into some of these fights, if the disconnection debate becomes a very big fight, as it might be, or this notion of moving the transportation referendum to the May ballot, which Democratic leadership now says it wants to do, becomes a big fight. I mean, there are all sorts of things that can happen, right? The Republican caucuses can elect to require bills be read in full. In the case of Rob Nose's 130-page bill, that cuts a couple days out of the floor potentially. Or there's a walkout. I mean, we passed Measure 113, was that 22, I think? We passed Measure 113, which says if lawmakers walk away for 10 days in a session, they cannot seek re-election, right? But that means that they can walk away for 9 days in a session. And in a 35-day session, that gets very, very important. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I don't want it to happen. But when things do get very heated in the Capitol, and there's a line that the Republicans are insisting cannot be crossed, that the Democrats would like to cross, or whatever, those kind of things come into play, and that's when you get into trouble. So a walkout could upend it. We don't have no indication that that's happening, and we really don't. I honestly don't know much about Elmer's, how she's going to act as leader. She doesn't seem overly bellicose like that, but we're just going to have to see.
One of the things I learned when I first started covering the legislature is that each session normally has at least 3 major blow-ups when things seem like they're going to fall apart. I didn't see those in last year's session. Until the end, right. And maybe that's why there wasn't more progress.
Fascinating. It's very interesting. I'm going to have to think about that in my experience. But I think you're right. There's kind of phases in a long legislative session where things get really tense over something and then they calm down, and then they get tense again and they calm down. I do think, Dirk, to your point about a walkout, if there was one, that takes off a big chunk of the session. And when every minute in a short session counts on moving bills, it matters a lot. And those dynamics, especially with what we're seeing, at the federal level and how much more explosive conversations are because of what's the policies coming from this administration. I think the tensions are going to be really high generally, and so it'll be interesting to see what tools both parties used to move legislation, to move votes, to move hearts and minds of their colleagues, because it matters a lot what your personal relationship is when things are heating up outside the building. I had a great relationship with Mike McLean when he was the Republican leader, and we would fight on the floor, and then we'd go have a drink. And having those personal relationships, even when things are really tense, it's incredibly helpful, and I wonder what the overall environment and what we're seeing from this federal administration and our communities is going to do to the ability for legislators to work together.
I would just also say, like, we have a couple presiding officers, Senate President Rob Wagner, House Speaker Julie Fahey, very smart people, but they have not proven very adept at handling those kinds of conflicts and signposting things and really making the best of their time all the time. So again, I would like to see them do that. We need them to be effective, but it gets tricky.
Yeah, I will say, in my just couple of years covering the legislature, I haven't seen these leaders sort of take the opportunity to, if there's a contentious vote coming up or something like that, to reach across the aisle and try to find that sort of compromise or try to find that sort of consensus between parties at all. So yeah, I'm interested to see what happens with leadership also.
So for folks in the audience, who are the members that you'll be watching? Like, who should they be paying attention to if they're they don't really know who people are, but they're interested in seeing kind of the movers and shakers? Who would you recommend that they watch as individual members?
I would say they need to watch the Ways and Means subcommittees. And if they have a particular passion, they need to make sure that their passion is being lobbied before the subcommittees. That's one reason the city of Salem has, and also the fact that Peter Courtney was the Senate president from Salem. That's why the city of Salem got a lot of hefty appropriations for the years. The city of Salem had a lobbyist who just lived in the halls of Ways and Means.
Not a kind recommendation that they watch budget subcommittees. There's almost no bigger purgatory in that building, but very important. I would say politically, you want to watch Ed Deal, Christine Drazen, both running for governor. They're both going to be grandstanding a bit in service of that. I'm very interested in what State Representative Cyrus Javity does this session.
Tell the good people why.
So Javity, until very recently, I think he's a two-term representative from Astoria. He, until recently, was a Republican, and he found again and again that he was disagreeing with Republicans on issues. I think his caucus didn't support his bills a number of times to the point, and he supported the transportation package, and so he is now a Democrat. And how he, a person with a lot of views that don't line up with a lot of Democrats fits into that caucus is going to be very, very fascinating. Whether he can win re-election in that district as a Democrat is going to be fascinating. He'll just be one to watch for me.
Yeah, it totally varies by issue, but I'll say on transportation, I feel like Senator Pham and Representative Gamba, both Portland area lawmakers, they seem to be sort of taking the reins on oversight of ODOT and wanting to hold the agency more accountable, which is something that a lot of lawmakers talked about last year, but there wasn't a lot of concrete action. There wasn't a lot of actual solidified plans of closely scrutinizing ODOT, seeing where are they spending money. And it feels like these two lawmakers, in the form of a new committee and holding longer committee meetings, seem to be eager to do that.
I'll mention two Republican lawmakers. One is Kevin Mannix from Salem. He started to be a vote in favor of the transportation package this last time. And Kevin's a pretty smart guy, former Democrat, ran for Attorney General and for governor. But where does he line up? Because he can be very influential, and he's worked well with some Democrats on things. Another one is the longest-serving House member, Greg Smith, from Eastern Oregon. He's under fire for some ethics issues. But he's also been a reliable vote for Democrats. So what will that mean? And one of the reasons you could tell he was a reliable vote was when the Ways and Means Committee did their road shows around the state, they would always make sure one of them was in his district, so he could show his clout.
All right, now it's time to hear from all of you.
So we'll ask you to keep it to 30 seconds for a question, and I will control the mic. And the second thing is to make sure you get the question and identify yourself as in your name first. Okay, open season. Who's got a question?
Can I stand up or sit
Yes,
down?
you can sit. You can stand up.
Okay.
Sit down. I'll take it to you.
Okay. Hi, I'm Albert Kaufman, and hearing you talking about transportation, I've been reading a lot about the Coos Bay terminal and the $200 million that was put forward to study that. That seems like money that we could, bring back and maybe fill some of the holes. Is there any chance that that might be happening? Otherwise, it just looks like somebody's going to get spanked for doing that.
It's very hard to speak to what projects they'll look to. I have seen the reporting too about whether that is viable or not. I have also heard that it has some, and I don't know if this is real, has some interest from the Trump administration who sees it as a potential win on the West Coast. So that might influence whether folks are ready to pull money back or not. I just don't know.
Hi, Bobby Regan. A lot of people believe that as Portland goes, so goes the state. Do you see any potential action in terms of trying to reinvigorate Portland's downtown?
So Portland is the redheaded stepchild right now. I mean, I mentioned that economic development is going to be a big issue, and almost the first thing you talk about with anyone across any stripe of politics. Democrats, Republicans, they say Portland's taxes are too high. They start throwing shade at Multnomah County. There is still a lot of heartburn over the preschool for all tax, the fact that we have the highest marginal income tax rate in the nation. We don't have a sales tax, so it's not the highest tax burden. But, so I don't know. I mean, the most thing I hear about Portland is this notion that Democrats and Republicans are finding reason to believe that the taxes are too high here, that it is chasing high-income earners away, and that's having a negative impact.
But do you think they can have a tax conversation? Not even in the short session, in the next long session. I mean, can the legislature have a tax conversation that is successful? Well, or not just raising taxes, but managing taxes as an overall conversation.
Senator Frederick is here, and maybe some other legislators might speak better to this than I, but my sense is that Oregon has for a long time not made sure that its tax policy fits with whatever its goals are for the state. It has been more about raising money for this program or that program. Government is not like business. It should not be run like a business. But it's important to have a business plan so we all know where we're going and agree on it and are headed in the same direction.
Yeah, I can't imagine any serious tax conversation happening in the next 5 weeks. I think any such conversation would have to wait until next year's session.
Definitely not next week, but next year, we are looking at a way bigger budget hole, right? So raising taxes may be very, very interesting or tantalizing to people. We are already hearing some discussion by Senator Anthony Broadman about what it might look like if we brought an income tax into the state. I think people here know that sales tax. Thank you. I think people know that has not been palatable to people many times, but there is some discussion of that. Given the recent history of hard things in this legislature with this group, hard for me to imagine.
Hello, I'm Kevin Levy, a representative of my own personal house. We're seeing a lot of climate catastrophes and issues throughout all of Oregon. Wildfires, smoke inhalation, heat dome, ocean acidification. A lot of these are in Republican-led districts. Are you speaking with any of these representatives that are being affected by like horrific issues and recognizing or realizing that we should start focusing or investing in things that are dramatically, affecting their own constituents?
Well, this may not be what you want to hear, but anything Oregon does to reduce climate, greenhouse gases will have pretty much no effect on Oregon. There are because we're such a small contributor. There are things we need to be paying attention to, like traffic, and if your neighborhoods and schools near busy freeways and things like that, culverts, all sorts of small things like that. But the messaging in the past has not been good because it's been about, we want to be a leader for this, we need to, help save the world, which I agree with. But for somebody who lives in rural Oregon and is being told, your gas is going to increase, or you can't do this, or you can't do that, that's not their first priority. We have to deal with, this is why it affects you and will help you in what you want to do, as opposed to being the idealistic ideal, regardless of where it is on the ideological spectrum.
Well, I also, just to the question, I just don't feel this being a front and center issue at this point. It certainly was in the past. When Jennifer was in the legislature for a number of sessions, climate change, how we reduce our carbon emissions was a very, very central issue. And now we are dealing with potential budget catastrophe and a lot of things. I know the environmental community has not been a huge fan of Governor Kotek since she got into office because they kind of feel like her attentions have been elsewhere. I may be proven wrong, and I haven't been having those discussions that you mentioned, but I just don't see it being a marquee issue this session.
I agree. The vast majority of lawmakers that I talk to don't mention that as a top priority. Sorry, I had a thought and it just escaped me.
That's okay. It happens.
I feel like last year, this is what I'm gonna say. I feel like during last year's session, groups came away with a lot of, some groups had major wins, but I feel like the environmentalists didn't have any key wins over the long session. Am I missing something? Did you all pick up on any?
You are not. You are not missing something.
I think, as with transportation, there could be a tendency to overshoot. And again, I'll quote Courtney, instead of going for the whole loaf, he would go for one slice. Then he'd come back and get another slice at the next session. Then he'd get half a loaf and eventually get the whole loaf. And when you overshoot on an idea, you set the concept back.
Hello, my name's Amelie, and I'm a high school teacher in a nearby school district, and I'm now the teachers union president for my district. So we have a lot of concerns about the budget for our district, obviously. So I'm wondering about the Education Stability Fund, the emergency fund, and the triggers to be able to spend that money. Do you have any information or insight into that?
There are certain criteria that have to be met. And the last revenue forecast was trending toward those criteria, but it depends upon what comes out with the first revenue forecast and how much appetite there is. Because, is this going to be the new normal? These are things we have to deal with. How much would you want to take out of those reserve funds? And thank goodness Oregon has been putting money into those reserves instead of spending it.
I can say I talked to two Democrats last week, different stripes of the party, in the legislature, and they both mentioned tapping the ESF. Like I said, it does sound like there is growing momentum behind that as a plan. I'll be honest, I don't remember what the triggers are to get it at this point.
But I do think it's important to remember that there are triggers, that for most of the savings accounts that the legislature has access to, there are outside triggers that allow them to tap it. So I think that's something to watch as well, because folks don't often realize that it's not just something the legislature can decide that they want to tap into their savings. I think all of our reserve funds have some sort of triggering event, or the budget has to hit a certain number, or that Senator Frederick is nodding his head, so I must be right. But I think often I've heard in the public, like, why aren't we just tapping the reserve funds? And it's like, because the legislature can't until they meet certain criteria.
Well, and again, being judicious here is probably wise, right? Because this short session is the least of our worries in the next 6 years, right? The next 2 budgets, as far as we know, are going to be very, very tough. And so if we're blowing the whole education stability fund on this budget, this current budget, I think that probably creates problems down the line.
Win Wakala, City Club member. This is National Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and it's all over the state. Down in Southern Oregon, people are being labor trafficked to grow illegal marijuana. And then, of course, we have girls being prostituted at casinos, truck stops, and then they're also underage at strip clubs and being prostituted. Have you seen any kind of movement on people, on legislators wanting to do something about that?
No, I have not. I mean, one thing about this is we are waiting until, I think, Thursday when, or late Wednesday, the session's gonna go live. We're gonna see all the bills that people have pre-filed. There's gonna be a lot of them and things we don't know about yet, right? But nothing I've heard so far on that.
Yeah, I was actually going to say that if folks want to know what's going to be talked about, we haven't talked about it tonight, when those bills go live, you could go to the legislative website and see them. And thank goodness it's a short session because it's a small enough universe of bills that you could actually look through them.
Kate McPherson, City Club. Question, what about the kicker? Is that any place that we can play and do some rethinking?
The kicker is not going anywhere. It is a lost cause for people to be fighting it.
There are at least 2 bills that are going to be emerging this session that are going to take on the kicker in different ways, not just full get rid of the kicker, which I think no one thinks would be palatable at the ballot box, but try to reason with voters in some ways. So you can have some kicker back, but maybe if it reaches a certain threshold, maybe we put it toward other stuff. I have not seen the polling. Anything about the kicker is going to be a vote of the people, probably a very tough vote, but I think we are going to see a couple, at least attempts to rejigger or reform it. I know that Senator Frederick is big on that. I don't think that they necessarily have legs, but we would probably talk about it.
Senator Frederick.
Well, you're going to hold the mic. Okay, that's fine. There's a whole list of things that I've been writing down here. But there's a basic concept that is a concern of mine, and that is the fact that in '95, there were 65 people who had press credentials in the Capitol. Last year, there were 15. So we aren't seeing people knowing about what's going on in the Capitol. We don't have reporters there. A lot of it's because of the kind of change that's taken place in the media environment. While you folks were dealing with bureaus in the basement, all of the TV stations in Portland pulled out of the Capitol. So you just don't have that kind of information. And then you have when you do have folks there, and I'm not talking about you folks because quite frankly you managed to handle things pretty well, but there's a significant emphasis on confrontation and not having an understanding of how the process works or that people are working together. That has an impact on what's happened with the Capitol because you haven't had people together. And the lounge will make a huge difference, as well as just the opening of the rotunda. People can go back and forth. But what we don't have is an understanding of what kind of solutions journalism that might take place. And that's a concern of mine, because while we can set it up so that it's the R's and the D's, and that seems to be an easy thing to talk about, it doesn't mean that you're getting anything done. And I'm tired, frankly, of people telling me how terrible it is down there and how we're always fighting when we aren't always fighting. But that's the impression that folks get, because that's the only media that they're getting is that we're always fighting. I'm not sure, where we're going to go with that. I can't speak to some of the bills that are coming up. We're going to have all sorts of things. But it would be great if we could find a way to actually cover who's doing what and what those issues really are, rather than setting them up as only an R&D kind of battle.
I agree, and I know I've been guilty of maybe focusing on conflict at times more than I should have, and that wasn't good. But I think this is where City Club members come in, and everyone in the audience. You have the power to read diverse coverage and make sure you really understand an issue and the facts. Now, some people say President Trump is the greatest president in the history of the United States. Some people say he's the worst president. Neither of that is a fact. Those are opinions. And we all get caught in our expressing opinions as facts. So the more that you can ferret out what actually is happening, ask questions, communicate with your lawmakers, and encourage them to operate in a way that you would like them to operate, the better.
I mean, I would also say I agree with you, Senator. I don't think we go in there saying, well, this bill they fought about, so we'll cover that bill and nothing else. I mean, there are a lot of bills that get passed. Many people will tell you all day in the Capitol, 80%, 90% of the bills are bipartisan, and it's true. We do pick which bills we feel are most important, and is the lens through which we look at that sometimes tainted by conflict? Maybe a little too much, probably. I agree with you on the solutions journalism piece, and I also agree with you that I wish we had 65 reporters in the Capitol and not 15 of us, or often far less. But that's where we are, so we're always trying to improve.
One question over here, and then.
Hi, Dave Barenberg. Just who do you think are rising stars to watch in the legislature?
That's a great question. Great question, Dave.
I feel like Anthony Broadman has made waves. Now he's the revenue chair. He feels like one to watch. I would have said Anessa Hartman, but because she seemed to be having a lot of impact, but now she's on her way out and going to run for a county seat. I don't know. Who do we think?
I think Representative Graber. She's been around a little bit longer, so I don't know if she counts as a rising star. But she just digs into some separate issues that maybe some other people don't. If you are not subscribing to legislative newsletters, there are a few good ones out there that we're subscribing to. A lot of them are just repeats of what the caucus offices, the House Republican or Democratic office, the Senate Republican or Democratic office, just what they give to people to put in their newsletters. But there's some really good newsletters out there, and I encourage you to read them. And Dirk mentioned Senator Broadman from Bend. He and Senator McLean from Powell Butte are sponsoring some legislation together. And it's probably not going to get a lot of press coverage. It's about ensuring that it's legal to cut across private land, corner cutting they call it, to go from public land here to public land here, but there's a small strip of private land. And hunters and others are very interested in that. And there are a lot of those things happening, and we need to highlight those where those lawmakers are working together on the things that affect everyday Oregonians.
I would say, I don't know how long he's been in the legislature. I think not that long, but House Majority Leader Ben Bowman. I feel like a lot of people would kind of characterize him in that group of kind of a rising star. Seems to be seen as very pragmatic and at least sort of willing to reach across the aisle and try to find consensus. I think that'd be my.
I'll just add Sue Rickey-Smith from the Tigard area. She was on the school board, I think might still be, has a lot of experience. And I think she's going to be somebody to watch as a new member who has a history of serving in her community in other roles. I think she's going to be a really interesting legislator to watch.
Leslie Munoz also has been sort of taken a big lead on some of this federal immigration enforcement stuff. I think that just in her first term, she's been making a lot of headlines also.
Okay, thank you. That concludes our program. I want to give a special thanks to Jennifer and our panel, Dirk, Carlos, and Dick, for and I want to give a special congratulations to Dick for an amazing career. Yeah. We're all indebted to your many years of service in journalism for our state. Again, thanks to our season sponsors, AARP Oregon and the Don Sterling Fund of the Oregon Community Foundation. I'm heartened to hear a conversation about needing to reach for some commonality, some nonpartisanship, because that's the space that City Club fills, just as we did tonight. Please join us for our next program for the District 3 counselors on February 4th in Southeast Portland. And finally, you can become a City Club member, and you can do it today. Thank you for being here.